And good to have you all here on the 8 p.m. edition of the Urban Debate. Viewers, tonight we put the spotlight first on an issue that really concerns everybody, and a debate that repeatedly comes to fore every time a political party promises jobs reservation in the private sector, or every time a state comes up with a scheme for reservation, a special quota in jobs for the locals in the private sector, not just in the government sector. The most recent one being the state of Haryana. So the state of Haryana has now come up with this new law that 75% of the jobs will be for domiciles. Those are domicile certificates, those belonging to the state of Haryana. This will be applicable to jobs with salaries of about 50,000 rupees per month. And it's applicable for private sector companies, to companies, societies, trusts, limited liability partnership firms. It's also applicable to different other partnership firms, those employing 10 or more people. There are other conditions that have also been put in. If you read the fine print, there is exemption if no local candidates of desired skill are available. So that's one of the exemptions that has been given. Now, while this was one of the political promises of those in power today in Haryana, it's not been taken well by the industry bodies, and they've all, one after the other, come out to voice their objection to this move by the Haryana government. In fact, they've said that they're asking and urging the state to relook at the new law, that there isn't adequate skilled manpower necessarily available in the state of Haryana, and this may provide shield to firms in unethical practices. But for healthy competition, you also need those kind of candidates. The hiring needs to be on the basis of merit. The hiring needs to be on the basis of talent. And if you come out with these policies, they don't seem very business friendly. And it's important in Haryana, you have quite a few infrastructure companies, lots of manufacturing industries. Gurgaon itself is a hub of the automobile sector around that area of Manesar. So there is a large private sector interest when it comes to the state of Haryana. That's not the only state, by the way. This is just the most recent state. But if you look at some of the other states also, the one before Haryana was actually Madhya Pradesh, that brought in a law for quota in jobs in the private sector for locals. And before Madhya Pradesh, there are also states like Maharashtra, states like Gujarat, who do have similar laws, though how much do they get implemented is a different matter altogether. So tonight we're going to have a conversation. If more and more states increasingly bring in such laws and increasingly get tough in the implementation of these laws, put up these boundaries, is that a good economic policy? Does that make sense? What happens to the large-scale migration that we see? What happens to a few states where we only see people going out for jobs? What about few states that are seen as hubs for industries? Will they really continue to be hubs for industries if they bring in such kinds of rules and regulations? Those are the questions I want to ask our panelists who are joining in this evening. So let's say good evening to the guests who are joining us this evening. I've got Prateek Som, spokesperson of the JJP, Anchal Avijit, national spokesperson for the Congress Party, Mr. V.R. Sharma, MD for Jindal Steel and Power, Jagdish Khattar, former Managing Director of Maruti Udyog, Professor Ravi Srivastava, Director for Center for Employment Studies, Institute for Human Development in Delhi, joining us right now as well. So good evening to everybody. Mr. Bhargava, if I could start with you, and if you could give us a sense of to what extent can it impact, let's just begin with the automobile sector in Haryana. Okay, I'm just going to go across to Mr. Khattar in just a bit. Let me actually take this point across to Professor Ravi Srivastava. Professor Srivastava, good evening to you. Let's talk about Haryana first, and then we'll have a larger conversation.
Yes. So I think Tanvi, I think we should begin. I mean, I'm not going to do the timing or the motive of this change, but I think we should acknowledge, first of all, the problems that exist or the problems that exist. One is the high rate of unemployment, particularly youth unemployment in Haryana. And the second is already also the existing labor market distortions. And I'm referring here to the large scale hiring of workers through contractors who prefer, along with the employers, to hire workers from other states rather than local workers. And these two are basically, these reasons do provide some rationale for the state to intervene in some way. But the cure that is being attempted is worse than the disease, far worse than the disease. Because what it does is it impedes the acquisition of competitive acquisition of skilled workers or of workers of equal abilities. It will apply roughly to about 90% of workers that will be hired in Haryana by all kinds of establishments with 10 or more workers, and it will completely slow down the hiring process at a time when the Haryana and other states are recovering from the epidemic. Secondly, it has country-wide ramifications because migration is not only a state-specific problem or solution. It actually is a corrective to the patterns of demographic development that we have in the country and the patterns of economic development that we have in the country. It is a corrective to both. So it also impedes that, and by impeding that, it also hampers the country's development process. So in a sense, it actually it will Haryana will have to pay a heavy cost if it actually implements a policy like that. And I'm not saying whether the changes that are being attempted are within the four corners of the constitution. There will be people who will be bigger experts than me on that aspect. But certainly, it is something for which Haryana, industrial development in Haryana, industrial growth in Haryana, overall growth in Haryana, overall growth in employment at Haryana will certainly pay a heavy price. And I think that is something which policymakers must take into account.
Okay, that's a very interesting point that you make, and apologies for the confusion in the beginning, but let me go across to Mr. Jagdish Khattar. Mr. Khattar, when we say that, Haryana could pay a heavy price for it, what could we be looking at? Will this make companies relook their plans? Could it be relooking just expansion plans, or could it also be reconsidering what exists already in the state?
You see, let me first say that we really have a national problem as far as employment is concerned. I mean, the situation nowadays has been getting a little worse. Hopefully, it will improve. So we must go into the cause. This problem was not there a couple of years back, but it has emerged now. And we must see that what is the reason, and the reason is the same. So the long-term and medium-term answer really lies in creating more jobs. There is no substitute for that. Till such time that happens, every state government, they're all political parties, they'll try and find out some short way of meeting the needs and the aspirations of the people. But as was mentioned, even now, even though the Act says that this 70% employment will be given, there is one clause, which I think you yourself mentioned, that in case these people are not available, then other people from outside can be.
We seem to have got a technical glitch there with Mr. Jagdish Khattar's line. We're going to see if we can get him back in just a bit. But let's get our other panelists in on this conversation. And I want actually Prateek Som to respond to what has been said now by two guests. Prateek Som, it doesn't look like the industry is very enthused with your new law.
See, it is not the case. Before enactment of this act, when the bill was getting prepared, there were 8 rounds of discussions which happened with industry and other stakeholders. And I can tell you that there is a lot of myths propagated by opposition. First of all, our biggest myth is that now the employers will start giving pink slips to the current employees. See, that is not the case. Fact is that this act only applies to the future employment. Second point, which is very important, and now it is being propagated, that industry will go away from Haryana. See, Haryana is not the first state to introduce such kind of law. When we talk about Maharashtra, which also has Mumbai, which is the financial capital of India, Maharashtra has 80 has a act which is called as Marshi Act, which states that 80% reservation for those persons who can speak Marathi. And let me tell you, being a lawyer also, that it is in contravention of Article 15, which states that it is the duty of the state to protect people against discrimination on the basis of caste, color, race, religion, and sex and creed. So
But not
Haryana
region.
is not discriminating. Let me complete. Haryana is not discriminating on the basis of these things, where a language or a religion is going to be the deciding factor. But whereas it only wants that a local people who all are also the stakeholder for the industries should get the better opportunity.
No, so you
Now
say
the third thing
you
which is
say 1 minute, Pratik. You say that you've had 8 rounds of conversations with the industry, which could actually mean anything. The industry could have very well come to you, and in all of these 8 rounds said no, and you can still go ahead and make whatever laws you want, or they make some suggestions and you bring in what you think you want. Because I am reading a quote from Uday Kotak, president of FICCI, saying that the Haryana government's move will spell disaster for industrial development and private investment in the state, to force investors and entrepreneurs in such a regressive straitjacket format will force them to look beyond Haryana. I'm reading now a comment from Chandrajit Banerjee, Director General for CII, saying at a time when it is important to attract investments at state level, Haryana government could have avoided imposing restrictions in such a manner. I can also read the comments made by the managing director for Hughes, who's also the chair for NASCOM in Haryana. While all other states are coming up with forward-looking policies, this reservation will create a perception that Gurugram is no longer business-friendly destination. I can also quote statements from the industry chambers of Haryana itself, making similar points from the CII Gurugram specific zone. So I don't know who you spoke to and what they told you, but nobody seems to be publicly saying backing you today.
Can I clear? See, this apprehension, if we read section 5 of this act, it states that employer will have a discretion to employ a person with proficiency, qualification and skill. If he doesn't get it, then he will have a freedom to file for the exemption with the appropriate authority. And if authority feels so that this is justified, they will be exempted. So no unskilled, non-proficient, non-qualified person is being imposed to the industry. The only
but at what cost? Is there a cost condition to this?
See, yes, there is some annual fine which ranges from 50,000 up to the 2 lakh. That will go up to the industry. But if they are able to justify that I need a person with particular skill and the local candidate does not possess that skill, then he may file for an exemption.
No, I understood that. My question was, just one clarity on this, Pratik. Just one clarity on this. I'll allow you to finish your second point. My question to you was, is that cost based? What if I tomorrow, as an automobile major, turn around and say I want this skill, a mechanical expert or an engineer expert at a cost of 100, but I am only getting it at a cost of 500 in Haryana. So, which is why I want to employ people who I can get at cost of 100, but maybe from elsewhere with the same skills. Skill condition is one. At what cost is the business going to acquire that skill condition will decide whether the business is viable for them or not.
Absolutely. So this is the point. What we are saying, that this act will apply to the people who are employed are below the salary of 50,000. So a local person who is earning 20,000 rupees will be more comfortable in working at a local place rather than a person from Bangalore coming as a crew, coming as a helper, coming as a cook, coming as a driver, or coming as help. So they will not, their ends will not be met in this fashion. Another important point which I want to make is Mr. Khattar is also on the panel. When the representation from the industry came, one point was also discussed, like under the Hooda government, Haryana saw one of the very major HR violence which happened in Maruti. That happened because of the local influence. that point has also been considered, that the employer will have a discretion that he may cap hiring of local employees, local candidates up to 10% from a particular district. Even this minutest thing has been taken care of. Gujarat has this law, Himachal has this law, Uttarakhand has this law. Has the industry vanished? It has. Gujarat has literally prospered. Maharashtra has prospered. Mumbai is there in Maharashtra. These laws are existing since 37 years. Nothing new has come. Only thing is that this policy is now becoming an act, and now local people will also be able to flourish under this industry.
Okay.
This will not go anywhere.
Okay, let me get, I think Mr. Khattar is back with us. Mr. Khattar, go ahead please, we lost the line.
Yeah, what's the question to me now?
Yeah, no, you can finish the point that you were making, and in case you want to respond to what Prateek Som is saying, giving that specific example of the unrest at the Maruti plant.
No, I didn't hear that. That was not working. Sorry, there was no connection when he talked about the Maruti plant. I just got online just now.
Okay, so let me just ask you this question again, Mr. Khattar. The point that the government seems to be making right now is that it is still to the, the condition that is being given to the manufacturers is, or any industry is, if you don't find the skill in this state, then you can always get it from out of state. You just have to prove that you haven't found the right skills in this state. So where is the problem?
Quite right. I mean, this is, when I saw this, I thought that the government had given, as far as public reception is concerned, that this is what they are doing, but they have given a safety valve for the industry to make use of it. And what I feel is it will all depend upon the relationship that is there between the industrial unit and the state authorities. I think they are all practical people. They'll try and work out some system by which they can meet the state's aspirations also, and also meet their requirements. It's not a very neat way of doing it. It will, it will depend on individuals, how they work with each other. But that clause, I think, has been given so as, the industry doesn't come to a halt and some sort of a negotiation can take place. But listen, at the end of the day, what is important is creation of jobs. I mean, I have seen that the moment there are enough jobs, all these things don't come up.
Correct.
And the solution really lies in creating more jobs. Otherwise, I mean, it's, in Japan, they say it's sharing poverty. I mean, once you're going to share poverty, there are going to be problems. We have all got to work together to create prosperity. I think we need to work on that much more. And meanwhile, this is, of course, a difficult situation. One can understand the local conditions also and aspirations also. And my experience is that the state is also practical people. With the industry, with the representatives, they'll find a way out. Not okay, but
by not harming them, but finding a middle way. I think that's the point that Mr. Khattar was making there. Yes. Okay. So there are two aspects, and let's deal with both the aspects. Before I get Anshul in on the job crisis front, let me actually go across to Mr. V.R. Sharma as well. Mr. V.R. Sharma, the way it's been designed in this state, does it look as if it's doable from both ends, that you can keep the government happy, you can, employ locals while also having a sustainable, viable business?
Yeah, good evening, and good evening to Mr. Som and to the panelist, and good evening, everybody. Look, we have to find out, rightly said by Mr. Khattar, that how to generate employment. I mean, that is most important factor. Today, if we see, more than 80% of the farm or agri workers in Haryana, they come from other states. So that also we have to see. That means there is a shortage of manpower in Haryana. Haryana traditionally has been a very prosperous state, and the per capita income in Haryana has been very good, and they have been maintaining at least second or third position. And once upon a time, they were on the second position, now maybe on third position. And I think this position will be maintained in future also. So Haryana has to be very broad-minded, and they will have to see that more and more investments, they do come in the state. And people, though it is a very tiny issue, but people should not feel that they are forced. rightly said by him that many of the other states, they are already having this kind of regulation or this kind of law for the last 25 years or 30 years or 37 years. This is possible because all of these states were very poor states. And at that time, the decision might have been taken so that they can create employment for the local people. That is very good. Now, as a government, yes, you have the responsibility to create jobs. You have the responsibility to find a total balance in between investors and the job seekers. But my suggestion to government of Haryana is that we should try to increase investments from the government side. Like Haryana is a very rich state. We have a lot of agriculture produced in this state. So agro-based economy, agro-based industries, they can come in the state. And government of Haryana should own at least 51% of those industries which are agro-based. This is one. The second, the PWD itself and government of Haryana has a big role to play. If you see in PWD, road building, construction, everything, the local Haryanvi people are very less. So we have to take a very holistic view. As far as the workers for the industry are concerned, this is the matter which Haryana government should leave on the industrialists. And Haryana government should levy all the taxes, unemployment tax or any other tax tomorrow they want to levy. And those taxes will be paid happily by government of, by the industry in case some cess is applicable. I think a balanced view has to be taken. And one should not be forced that you should have this much of percentage of Haryanvi. Maybe they may have more, maybe 80%, 85% or 90%. So, but it should not be a law. This is what I feel. Okay. I think this should be taken very, very congenial dialogues. And Haryana government should own the industrialists that they are Haryanvis, they are part of Haryana, and they should try to create more jobs by inviting people in the state than forcing people to employ 75%. My view is this.
Yes, I mean, usually you say states come up with policies to attract investors, to attract corporate houses, to collaborate with the industry, to create more jobs. But sometimes that just seems like the more difficult path. Anshul, Avjit, as two of our experts have pointed out, we are now seeing more and more instances of governments maybe taking the easy route. When there is a jobs crisis, you limit the jobs to your locals and thereby keep your local vote bank happy without thinking of the others. Isn't this what Kamal Nath also tried in Madhya Pradesh?
Tanvi, let me just first of all, agree with some of the eminent speakers before me. I think what has happened in Haryana today and the enactment of this law is actually a function of their failure. It's actually misgovernance. It's the inability to bring about jobs. Haryana, to some estimates, has 40% unemployment. That's a staggering number for actually a relatively rich state. When it comes to small states, Haryana is even richer than Delhi in terms of GDP. But and also you went into minute details about jobs and about skills and who's going to get employed and not employed. I think this is a theoretical argument. This is essentially an academic argument, and it's going to remain one because this scheme is essentially a kind of a spectacular eyewash. It's a deceit of the most monumental proportions because the jobs are never going to come. I'm going to give you a brief political background to this and then the problems with this particular scheme. So I'm going to tell you about the back of what is happening right now. What is the context? It's come out on the back of the farmers' bill, about the protests going on Delhi's borders, about the problem of unemployment in Haryana, about how people are not supporting the government on the farm laws. There's a lot of sympathy for them because Haryana is a state which is also industrial, but also there's a huge farming community. Particular communities are deeply rooted in the farmers' tradition over there. It's unresolved, the farm laws, and the people of the state are sympathetic towards the agitating farmers. That's one point. Then you have, it's a coalition government. We missed that political point out altogether. There's Mr. Chautala over there, who's initiated this law. He has a sizable vote bank among his community. That community is not happy with him. He has to do something to appease that. So there is a political background to this particular law. This government is hanging on the edge. It's hanging on the precipice, because if it doesn't do anything, there's always a danger that it might collapse. That's the political point. I'm going to tell you what the problem with this law is.
No, so you agree that this is a political move, and every government does that for the political reasons. Was that what?
Let's talk about this government, Tanvi.
Why this government?
Anshul,
then the same should apply to what happened in Madhya Pradesh. Then the same should apply to what Vilasrao Deshmukh attempted in Maharashtra and tried to bring in these rules, not just about the region but also about the language. Then the same should apply in Karnataka. Then the same should apply in Gujarat. It's not one party or one state. All parties across states have resorted to this.
I'll come to that in a minute. Just let me tell you what the problem with this law is. The first problem with this law is, and therefore I thought this was an entirely theoretical discussion, because this law is a prospective law. So industries will be set up. Right? So there will be clearance, there will be land given, there will be construction, there will be hiring, and HR community will be activated, and finally there will be employment, and finally wages will go to somebody, and somebody will get employed. I don't know how long this will take, 5 years, 10 years. This is exactly like what the Atmanirbhar Abhiyan, the Atmanirbhar doctrine is all about. It is all perspective. It is all in the future. The 27 lakh crores that are promised for this particular scheme are never going to materialize, because we don't know where it's all gone. It's all about having infrastructure for the future and a kind of a circuitous maze-like approach for, on the supply side, for making the economy grow. It's never going to work. That is exactly what the Atmanirbhar doctrine is. And from the moment the Prime Minister said those fatal words, Atmanirbhar doctrine, it was a complete eyewash in itself. It's vacuous, it's empty, just like this particular law. So that's why I think that this is remaining a much more academic discussion. However, I completely agree with you. They have states that have indulged in reservations in private sector, by the way. We're talking about reservations in private sector because it's low-hanging fruit. It's easy to do it, which is much more difficult than reservations in public sector, which becomes a double-edged sword. So here you can just sit back comfortably and announce particular laws, whether they materialize or not materialize, it doesn't matter. Anyway, there's a cap of 10 years.
Your point has been made now. Your point has been made. Now, do you want to respond to my question now, or should I first get Prateek in to respond to what you are saying? I just admitted, Anshul, that every political party does it. I can actually read out to you what Congress leader and the then Congress government in Karnataka attempted to do in 2016. You sought to amend the Karnataka industrial employment rules to provide Kannadigas with 100% reservation in blue-collar jobs. This was thankfully vetoed by the law department, and later on the Advocate General of the state actually said, please just issue advisory and guidelines to the industry and let them handle the rest. So, from Kamal Nath in Madhya Pradesh to Mr. Siddaramaiah in Karnataka to Mr. Vilasrao Deshmukh in Maharashtra, if anything, I think Congress party seems to be the pioneer in coming up with these political moves when it comes to a jobs crisis. Would you agree or not?
Let me say at the very outset, Tanvi, to answer this question, that I'm against any form of sort of in principle, against any form of sort of regional nativism or state nationalism. I can understand the demands of the people on the state, where they have to fulfill the aspirations of the state. That's why they've got elected. And therefore, reservations certainly becomes a tool which can be employed under the Constitution, by the way, to fulfill certain needs and aspirations of the people if it's done. So I do understand that there is an element of populism whenever such schemes are implemented. There is an element of demagoguery here. I admit that. But ultimately, I can agree to that populism if the scheme is implemented in certain ways for the benefit of the people. Here, it's never going to happen. It was said time and again that unemployment is a huge problem in the state itself. 40% of the people, a staggering number. But where are the jobs going to come from? Where are they going to come?
Okay, so let Prateek Som answer that, and then we will take it further from there back to our experts. Yes.
I think Mr. Avijit is highly misinformed, or either he pretends it to be. In his whole address with lot of flashy connotations, he says that it is an attempt by Haryana government to hogwash on the farm laws and what laws we have got due to the farm laws. Mr. Avijit, let me tell you that that bill was presented in Haryana Assembly before even launching of this farm agitation. And the preparation of bill is going on from last 1 year. That is point number one. Second thing which you say is that there is no job in Haryana. Your leader, Mr. Bhupinder Singh Hooda, has ruled Haryana for continuous 10 years. And everybody knows that Haryana became, especially Gurgaon and the NCR region, became a CLU industry. That is how a farmer became a builder, and a builder thereafter got CLUs, and no jobs were created because everybody was engulfed in this. Now this government is very sincerely trying to promote industry in Haryana, and one of the basic policy which I can tell you that under the leadership of Dushyant Chautala, now they are going to make a policy where a feeder of ITI and skill centers will be developed around the industry. So that is how this act will accomplish what government wants and what industry wants. A school boy goes out after 12th, he goes to the ITI center, gets skilled, gets certificate, goes for an interview, and an employer hires him. That is what the government wants and an employer wants. Nobody wants that a person buying a farmland, going to Chandigarh, getting a CLU done, and then selling it thousands of flats to interested home buyers. What happened in Haryana, we've all witnessed it. This is no hogwash for farm laws. 1 year this bill was in preparation before initiation of campaigns against the farm laws. This was already introduced in Haryana.
Okay. In fact, Pratik, if I remember correctly, the last time we had this debate, when you had made this promise as well and just come to power and begun work on it, you seem to can correct me if I am wrong, if my memory is failing me. You seem to suggest that the idea was to make the policy incentive based rather than the other way around. But that angle seems to be missing from your final policy.
No, it is not. If you have read the Haryana industry policy, from starting buying of the land, registration of the land, till the time production starts, Mr. Khattar must be very much aware about it. Haryana government incentivizes and gives a lot of subsidies on setting up the industry. I am telling you from the scratch, even for buying of the land, which no other state government gives, Haryana government gives these kind of incentives.
No, I meant incentives to follow this rule, incentives to meet this rule. I am saying if industries do implement and hire 75 local workers, then they get incentives for it rather than penalize if they don't meet the rule. That's the change, difference in approach that I'm asking you.
See, that industry gets lot of incentives. Industry gets lot of tax levies. Tax exemptions. Industry gets land. Industry gets lot of administrative setup. Government is providing whatever industry wants, and that is how Gurgaon has flourished. That is how even Faridabad is getting flourished. That is the role of the state.
Okay.
But we also have to understand that it cannot be one-way traffic. It has to be mutual as well. You have to promote the local people who are always there, who have given you their lands, who are providing all kind of resources through their state governments. There is a responsibility on the side of industry as well. And I can assure you, I can give a statement on record, there will be no harassment of any industry person in Haryana if they will properly follow these acts. These are very flexible acts.
Okay. So let me go back to our experts, and let me now ask Mr. Khattar this question. Mr. Khattar, now let's talk realistically speaking. How often do these policies properly get implemented? We've had similar policies, different versions maybe in many other states. Do they end up getting implemented, and do we see some kind of exodus of industries if they are implemented?
Listen, I think in India we are the best, we are experts in muddling through. We have policies, and those policies have a certain objective. Sometimes those objectives do not reflect the realities, but politically they are required, so we go ahead with it. And as was mentioned, even in this case, if you are not able to get the correct person, then you can recruit someone else. So you have a safety valve there. So the point I'm really making is that it's unfortunate. You see, at the end of the day, these policies We don't need so many policies as long as there is development, industries are coming out, agriculture is doing well, services are doing well. These are not required. There will be shortage of people. Even in Haryana, as was being mentioned now, certain categories of people are coming from outside. Local people are not working. So the point I'm really making is that, in India, we always muddle through. We don't, I mean, that's our speciality and that's the way we go forward. So even in this particular case, this policy has come, you are given a safety valve. What will happen if today retrenchment is taking place? Jobs are going, jobs are not being created, and we are talking about this. So the short point I'm making is that yes, they'll find a solution to this, but we must work on a bigger picture of creating more jobs, getting industries back, getting the agriculture back in a big way. We all talk about, the jobs and all, which is only organized labor is only 15-20% of our total labor. What about the unorganized labor? What's happening to them? What's happening in agriculture area? So, I mean, you have taken this small subject. I agree with your focus subject, but the issue is much bigger. And this issue can only be resolved or can be, reduced. The problems can be reduced if the other bigger issues which are not on the table today are taken care of.
Yes, in fact, I believe, and we here on Virana also believe, that one of the biggest issues in our country plaguing us today and has been for several years has been the unemployment problem. And I think that the warning signs were there, say, about 10 years ago. We've constantly spoken about it, but we've not managed to crack the code on how to keep up with the number of people who are coming onto the jobs market and providing them those jobs or creating an enabling environment. Professor Ravi Srivastava, what happens to the migration trend in states that come up with such rules? Does it stop people from going out of that state? And what about people who are entering the state? Does that reduce? If the intent is to say, oh, fewer outsiders and our own guys stay here and get a job, does that work?
Tanvi, to begin with, Mr. Som pointed out a number of states where he said this law had already been implemented, including Maharashtra. My understanding is that the laws have been created, but they have been put on hold in a number of states, or they have been challenged in other states, as in the case of Andhra Pradesh. So I am not aware of states where this law has been fully implemented. Similar laws have been fully implemented. That's number one, because states have sooner or later realized that it will not be very wise on their part to implement it for the sake of industrial development, industrial growth, and employment. And that is number one. So if they have not been implemented, we really don't have experience to go by to be able to suggest what might happen. I think Haryana's future lies in, as I think Mr. Sharma pointed out, in developing small, medium industries on a decentralized basis outside the NCR. Currently, mostly medium, large industries and the ancillaries are thriving in these areas. That should be changed. And if Mr. Som's objectives have to be achieved, then it should be, as you rightly pointed out, and he said this in an earlier discussion apparently, there should be incentives. There should be incentives for local hiring to firms of one kind or another kind. Instead of forcing firms in this manner and giving a lot of discretion to deputy commissioners. Mr. Khattar, you made a tongue-in-cheek remark about industrialists coming to an understanding with the labor department. The understanding will be based on corruption. In this case, those the officers have so much discretion. They can grant you an exemption, they can deny you an exemption, or the third subclause in that is that they can ask you to train and skill the workers and still hire them. So with the amount of discretion that exists with the deputy commissioners or the officers which will be handling it, this will be actually literally harking back to the kind of license and permit Raj and the corruption it entailed, which this government says it has been trying to get away from for a long time. And earlier governments have also promised that. So in any case, it will raise the cost of hiring labor. It will raise the time taken to hire labor. In Haryana, at this very critical juncture, when there is slow recovery. As far as migrants are concerned, migrants are universally deterred from working. They're universally deterred from working in Maharashtra. They deterred from working in Haryana. They deterred from working in Delhi and in other states, despite the fact that they contribute to the region's wealth, to the region's growth. They literally build up this country brick by brick, and yet they are universally discouraged. And and this policy will be again, and in fact, this policy states in so much that the squalor in the slums are due to the migrants coming in, and so on. So most policies, unfortunately, either implicitly or explicitly, discriminate against migrants, despite the fact that migrants contribute to the nation's wealth, contribute to the destination region's growth and investment. And this is something which, unfortunately, policymakers don't fully understand when they give a fillip to these policies.
In fact, and there is another danger which I feel is extremely important to highlight, and which is that when political parties attempt to use this to get the votes, attempt to garner some political advantage out of this, you are also driving in and encouraging the mindset that outsiders are coming in and ruining our place. This division that comes in along with this, Anshul, I think is very dangerous. We're being extremely short term when we think that, oh, right now there's a jobs problem, we're going to announce some, make these announcements, bring in these laws to make the locals happy. But at the end of the day, this is what starts. A North Indian versus South Indian, or a Bihari versus a Haryanavi, or a Marathi versus a UPite. That's how it starts. And the political parties need to stop doing that, need to stop creating these divisions.
I absolutely agree with you, Tanvi. I couldn't agree with you more. Unfortunately, this is a function of our political process itself. I mean, democracy itself creates conditions why you look for certain consolidated vote banks, you look for certain, aspirations which are regional, you create barriers. You attempt to do that all the time. In fact, this is one of the pitfalls of democracy. It's the best system we have, but it's not without its vulnerabilities and fragilities. This is one of them. And I think that governments throughout our history have all been vulnerable to this, including all kinds of governments. I'm not going to say it's not. I'm personally not for it, because if you look at Indian modernity, if you want to quote Indian modernity, it should be, cosmopolitanism, where everybody can go. It is often said, it's a cliche, that India is an indestructible union of destructible states. That means the states are usually undermined for the sake of the union of India. We've had a history of 70, 75 years. We've come out of a bloody civil war to have that history. So therefore, we look at Indianness, and I completely agree with that statement. Unfortunately, what happens is you still have to be answerable to your electorate. And there are reasons which are sought for to look to be answerable to that electorate, and therefore reservations becomes that tool. Now, another point is the reservations was there for empowerment of certain sections of society, which is to begin with the scheduled castes and scheduled tribes. That's 16(4) of the constitution. That's absolutely clear about that. Now, I want to know that every time the word reservations is used for jobs or anything, even in the private sector. By the way, I want to remind everyone in this panel that it was a UPA at the time in 2004 which had a group of ministers to talk about reservations in private sector, but that was for the cause of social justice, which is the primary cause. And we had discussions with the captains of industry then. We didn't implement it. There was no mandate because we thought that it would be misunderstood. We wanted the industry to take lead in implementing ideas of social justice, by the way, reservations for scheduled castes, scheduled tribes, which is the entire purpose of reservations anyway.
Yeah.
And therefore, that should never be forgotten when we talk about reservations, either in the private sector or in the public sector.
Okay, in fact, because we've spoken about this and Professor Srivastava also highlighted it, I want our viewers to know this. This also validates the point that these steps are taken by the governments keeping vote bank in mind, and they don't really have an intention maybe to implement it for most of it. In Gujarat, this was brought in, a GR was issued, and law was essentially created in 1995 by the then BJP government. They had proposed an 85% quota for the locals. it never got implemented, not in the textile industry, not in the diamond industry, nowhere in Gujarat. And since then, of course, the government successive state governments there of the BJP have gone in and brought in more investors, more industries, manufacturers, a lot of them shifting actually from Maharashtra to Gujarat in the last 2-3 decades. In Karnataka, they made this proposal, like I already pointed out. It was actually then vetoed by the law department itself and the Advocate General, who suggested that instead issue guidelines. So that never came about. They wanted 100% quota though. In Tamil Nadu, this a similar proposal was discussed, and a law was discussed for 50% jobs for locals in private sector. It was not imposed. In Madhya Pradesh is the only one which was brought in 2019, and as of last year, I think it's been on paper it's been imposed. We are yet to get any ground reports of whether the industries are actually following it or if there are any checks. In Andhra Pradesh is where the YSRCP government in 2019 brought in this 75% jobs quota rule. And the Andhra Pradesh High Court actually ruled that this may be unconstitutional. So the case still continues and it's been challenged in the court. So that's the reality of all the governments and the political parties who've made you this promise, including, by the way, similar promises being made in Tamil Nadu as we speak this election season. It doesn't happen. Now, let's move to the one final point that I wanted to discuss. And Mr. Khattar, that's about the issue you highlighted. The real issue, which is the jobs crisis. And looking at the current scenario in our country across industries, what role do you expect states to play? What should they be actually doing right now to create an environment or help create more jobs?
Creating jobs can be the states. They
Mr. Khattar, I'm really sorry, the line is very patchy. We're going to see if we can, try and fix that or get a better line with you. We seem to have also lost Mr. V.R. Sharma, but Professor Srivastav, let's hear your suggestions on what should actually be done by the state governments.
So my view, Tanvi, I already made 2 points. One is I believe that the state government should actively foster the growth of small and medium industries outside the NCR in Haryana. Haryana still has a fair amount of regional disparities despite the tremendous growth that we see, but it's basically very tightly concentrated in the NCR. This itself will help people in Haryana if they do it, because most of the people who arrive in Haryana actually take up jobs in the NCR itself. So that is one thing. Secondly, the state government should come up with incentive schemes which incentivize firms to hire local laborers. So I think it makes sense for firms to be asked to register the composition of employment at various levels. And to begin with, the Haryana government should make public the percentage of people who are hired locally and from outside. The third major reform which Haryana government should take up, and it has to be taken up at the national level also, Tanvi, is that we must actually deter companies from hiring workers through contractors. This is a major distortion in the labor market, and even with this law, this distortion is bound to increase. This encourages contractors to bring in workers from outside, even when local workers are available. So I'm not saying that there should be a law against migration or migration should be this thing, but what I'm saying is that practices which deliberately discourage the employment of local labor, they should certainly be, checked. And we should encourage all firms to hire locally. So I think the point which Mr. Som made about skilling, whether in the NCR region or outside the NCR region, is again a very valid point. And I think that it taken together with a role for microfinance and small finance to set up small units particularly by employed graduates and so on, which is also something will go a long way.
Okay, Mr. Khattar is back with us as well. Quick comment from him, and then Prateek Som can add to it. Yes, Mr. Khattar.
What I have, I'm not a great believer of those because it's important.
Already made that you're already there and which have now stopped functioning. We need to. It's easy because the units are there, there was some logic. They had an economic problem, other problems, we need to sort them out and give employment to the people who lost their jobs. We have to create jobs and people working with a minimal investment. Every time we can't make new investments to create new jobs. So this thing would be, we should carry out a survey and it should be available. Try and revive units which are closed. Try and give jobs to people who had jobs and who have lost jobs. It's about, I read somewhere that 10 to 11% of the unemployed people
And to revive units wherever possible. Then, of course, the things are expanded. But first, we need to do that.
Mr. Khattar, just a bad day for technical connections with you today. Technology seems to be failing us. But the sense that I got from what you are saying is that one of the things, Prateek Som, that the government should look at is reviving the industries and businesses that may have shut down and bringing back those jobs. It's not always easy, as Anshul was also saying, to make a plan of inviting fresh investments, setting up fresh projects, starting from scratch. That takes a really long time, doesn't always work out. And so the faster and better way perhaps would be to revive what you already have.
All right. So first of all, and I just want to specifically add to Professor Srivastav's comment that how the Andhra Pradesh law got shut down. A very important fact that particular act for reserving employment was made in 3 days. It was enacted on the 3rd day without any industry consultation, without passing the test of law. It is not the case in this act. First point. Second point, this point also very well taken up from Professor Srivastav, that feeding centers of ITIs and skill centers should increase. That is how our boys and girls will get skilled, and employer will get what he really wants from a particular employee. Third thing is that Haryana government will also focus on increasing the industry interaction. That is why in this act one clause is incorporated that on regular interval or maybe as the need arise, this act can be amended as per the situation, as per the demands. So it is more of a flexible thing. See, we have to see the intention of the government, that they basically want that local should also be should also be part of the growth story. That is the real intention behind it, and not that an unskilled person will go to the industry. A skilled, proficient and qualified person will work, and they will also state will also make arrangement for making him for bringing him up to that capabilities. And more important thing is that this act is made for a specific tenure, that is 10 years. Once the whole system gets into it, once the local gets up to the level of being qualified, proficient and suitably skilled, then maybe this act will cease to operate.
Okay, on that note, quick response from Anshul Avjit as well. Anshul, the defense here also is that we did detailed conversations. We also, this is a tenured policy. It's not a infinite policy to ensure that we skill our people. The government trains them, provides them opportunities to upskill, and then they participate in the state's growth story.
All very well. I mean, Mr. Som's points are very well taken. He's my honorable counterpart. I'm not in any form of disagreement with him. My point is that it's entirely, prospective. It's going to happen sometime in the future. What are you doing for just now, at the moment? I mean, there is 40% unemployment in the state. What are you going to do? This will take a time to realize, just like Atmanirbhar Bharat. I mean, you've gone around this kind of maze-like way into a kind of stimulating the economy. We've always said we need a direct approach, a Keynesian approach to this economy. That's not what is happening at the moment. And the second point I want to say is there's a complete disconnect between what the Prime Minister says about minimum government and maximum governance and this kind of law. I mean, here you have only a point that was raised earlier. You have only interference by the state into the workings of a private industry. How do you connect all the two? So there are a number of questions, there are a number of doubts, and on balance, I can only say that, well, it's completely diversionary. It's not meant to deliver. The objective was pure announcement in itself. It's not going to get beyond this. It was just pure announcement. So the objectives of this law are fulfilled in the announcement itself because it was meant to appease a certain section of people.
Well, I do want to wait and watch and see how this now plays out, and I think everybody here will also be closely tracking it. When the announcement was first made, my initial reaction was to say, oh, this many states have done. It's never gotten implemented. They've never imposed it. They've also now given one small exit route to the companies to say, or all you have to say is you didn't find the skilled labor, and so you went ahead and hired from elsewhere any which ways. But seeing the reaction that we've got from the biggest of the industry associations and chambers of commerce, FICCI, CII, NASSCOM, all of them very clearly saying that this isn't a good move, definitely shows that there is concern within the industry. Manufacturing, technology, all the new age businesses that are settled in and around Gurgaon, the automobile segment, which is so well settled in Manesar, one of the biggest hubs, and clearly there is some amount of discomfort there. So we wait and watch to see to what extent does the government go ahead and implement this, and does it hamper jobs creation more than it actually helps the locals get jobs. That's the big one. Thank you so much to all of our panelists for joining us on this conversation.